So I should probably explain to you guys what's going on in this clip. So quarantine. Well, at first it was fun, but now it's just going on forever. And I mean, I shouldn't be complaining since Rapunzel was practically locked up in her tower for 18 years, and the Shamus at SeaWorld have practically been locked up in their cages for well, ever since they were born. So I mean, I shouldn't be the one complaining, but I mean, here I am. But here's my point. A lot of things are closed down because of quarantine, and unfortunately, hair salons and salons in general are affected by that. So that means that people like me can't get haircuts, and I'm not the only one out there that can't get a haircut. There's a lot of people that want to get a haircut that can't, so there's another thing I shouldn't be complaining about, but I really can't stand long hair. And if I go one more month without cutting my hair's going to be as long as a 40-year-old mom's haircut. It's just not a good look for me, okay? So I went with my only option and I asked my grandpa if he can cut my hair. He said no. He just doesn't want to ruin my hair, and I understand that. So when he went to Costco, long lines, no fast pass Costco, that one, I borrowed his razor, which leads us back to this clip right here. I mean, I think I did a pretty good job. There were only like two bald spots. It's not really that noticeable since my bangs cover them. And with that being said, it is now time to get started on the actual tutorial. If you guys didn't know yet, and when I mean you guys, I mean like the 5 people that watch my videos, because apparently people I graduated with don't bother checking up on me, but you guys might be asking yourself, why am I making a Peter Pan costume? Well, I've always wanted to make a Peter Pan costume, I've just never made it. And I thought that this would be a good time to make it since we're all stuck in quarantine and we have a lot of time on our hands and I barely attend my one class. So, this was the perfect time to make one, so why not? Like all of my costumes, I started out with the initial sketch. So I like to sketch out the costume first just so that I can make tweaks and maybe add some stuff onto the costume like I usually do. Peter Pan is the most basic costume you can ever make. You can literally go to the thrift store and buy your materials there. But you guys don't really know me, and I like to overcomplicate things as much as I can. So I overcomplicated this Peter Pan costume. I took a lot of inspiration from, I think, Walt Disney World's Peter Pan. His costume has a whole bunch of leaves protruding from the shoulders and the back, and I really wanted to make that. And it might seem like I don't have a budget for these costumes, but I actually do. So instead of using the pleather material that they used, I will be using satin and cotton, which is pretty easy to locate, but cotton's pretty hard to locate at the moment. So if you don't want to end up using cotton, then try using silk, because nobody uses silk for their masks. Unless you do, then that's innovative. I also decided that I wanted to alter the costume a little bit. I'm not sure if it's actually altering the costume or just adding bits and pieces to the costume, but I decided that I wanted to make some leather gauntlets for the costume because I haven't made gauntlets in a long time and I just felt like this was a good time to make some. So I added that to the initial sketch. And with that being said, here is the finished sketch. So now that the initial sketch for the costume is done, it was now time to get started on the actual costume. So the first thing that I did was I took an old button-up of mine and I used that to trace out the front and back panels of the bodice piece. So for anyone wondering why I keep on calling this portion of the costume a bodice, I really don't have a clear explanation as to why I keep on calling it that, other than I've just grown accustomed to calling it a bodice. I don't care if it's men's clothing or women's clothing, I've just, again, grown accustomed to calling it that, so I just really hope when I am referring to it as a bodice that you guys will understand what I'm talking about. Alright, so sorry for the little rant there, but I just felt like that was necessary for me to explain, just in case I was offending any professionals out there with my choices of words. But with that aside, the next thing that I did was I decided to cut out the lining fabric that will be on the inside of the costume. Now, originally I wanted to use this dark green cotton fabric that I got from Walmart the same time that I got my satin green fabric. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough of that to go around for me to make both the lining on the inside of the costume and also the individual leaves that trickled down from the shoulders of the costume and also on the back of the costume. But thanks to the previous costume that I made, which was my DIY Renaissance costume, I had a lot of white cotton fabric left. So I inevitably used that for the lining fabric for the top portion of my costume, the sleeves, and also the collar. And here is just a quick clip of me showing you guys how I cut out that V-neck design for the front panel of the top. Next, I pinned both of the front and back panels together, making sure that the good sides of the fabrics are facing each other. And I also did remember to leave an opening on the bottom so that you can flip it inside out right after you sew them down. And just like I said, after pinning both of your front and back panels down, I took it to my sewing machine and sewed them down. After that, I flipped them inside out and ended up with two panels just like this. And if you guys couldn't tell, I'm actually wearing a different outfit here because this was the next day. So the next day, what I did was I pinned both of the front and back panels together on the shoulder seam so that I can put it on and mark out where I wanted that middle triangle to be. I know you guys can't really see what I'm actually doing in this clip, but that is what I did. For the next step, I needed to cut out the triangles on the bottom of the shirt. So how I did that was I took measuring tape and I drew a straight line across the front panel. So the reason why I drew a straight line across the panel was to ensure that all three triangles will end up being roughly around the same length. The last thing that I would want is for the triangles to look lopsided or to just look not right. So I basically just drew the line so that I can make sure that all the triangles will remain the same length at the end. After that, I roughly sketched out how I wanted the triangles to look like and then carefully cut them out. For the next step that I did, I took my back panel and then put it underneath the front panel that I just recently cut out. I do have to admit, I did get kind of lazy during this clip. I originally intended to sketch out the triangles that I previously cut out, but again, I got lazy and I just went on to cutting and hope for the best. But at the end of the day, it didn't really quite matter that I didn't sketch it out first because it ended up working anyways. I ended up needing to do a lot of revising to this costume. Because of the addition of the triangle pieces, I needed to find a different way to be able to flip both the front and the back panels inside out. My original plan was to obviously flip the panels inside out using the hole that I left on the bottom and just to hem that up at the very end, but I wanted the triangles to be seamlessly sewn. So what I decided to do was dethread the left sleeve from both the front and the back panels, creating a new hole for me to be able to flip the garment inside out when done. Next, I sewed down the triangles both on the front and back panels and flipped them inside out using the new hole that I just created. So for anyone who is actually following this tutorial step by step, this next portion that I'm going to do is completely optional, so you don't actually have to do it. But what I'm going to do is sew a straight stitch all around the borders of the front and the back panels, giving them a really nice hem. I actually do this step to all of my sewing projects as number one, it helps keep the fabric in place, and also number two, it gives it a really well finished look when the costume is actually done in the end. And after I hemmed both the front and the back panels down, I ended up with two panels that looked like this. So in real time when I was recording this part of the video, I actually stopped recording because I had a realization that I didn't have a Tinkerbell to accompany with my costume. Now, I know some of you guys might be saying that it's a little unnecessary to add a Tinkerbell to this costume, but to me, it's not unnecessary. In fact, it's necessary, because you can't be Peter Pan without Tinkerbell. It's just not how it works. Like I've stated a billion times before, I don't have any friends. And as sad as it may sound, even if I did have any friends, I don't think any one of them would be open to the concept of cosplaying with me. So I needed to think of the next best thing to do, which was to use my 2001 Return to Neverland Tinkerbell doll that I had somewhere in storage. And here she is getting her hair curled because her hair was a complete mess. So after being distracted with the whole Tinkerbell situation, I went ahead and made my sleeves. I wanted to keep my sleeves short, so what I did was I traced out my sleeve pattern design and then from the very bottom drew out a slanted triangle design so that when the sleeves are cut out there would be a point at the very top of the sleeves. Next, I cut out the same shape using my silk fabric. And after cutting your sleeves out, you should end up with two pieces that look like this. Now, this is going to be another completely optional step. Again, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it, but I personally wanted these sleeves to be posable. So how I did this is I sewed two straight lines about 1 centimeter away from each other, giving me just enough space to be able to wedge a thin wire in between them. And after wedging the wires inside the sleeves, I finally closed them up and gave them a nice hem. And here is how the sleeves look with the wires sewn inside. Next, I sewed both of the sleeves down onto my shirt and began work on the collar. For the collar, what I did was I took 2 pins and I marked out where I wanted the collar to initially start and end at. I also remembered to leave a little bit of space so that I can create those little X's that goes on his chest. Then I took my measuring tape and I measured all around to see how long the collar would be. In my case, it ended up being a total of 20 inches. And with that being said, the next thing that I did was I cut out a huge rectangle out of my white fabric. Then I cut it out to the length that I needed, remembering to add a little bit of seam allowance. And just like everything else I've made for this costume so far, the next thing that I did was I took my collar pattern, pinned it on top of my satin fabric, and proceeded to cut out the general shape of the collar. Next, I sewed the collar down using my sewing machine and flipped it inside out. The next thing that I needed to do was to create the lace-up that goes on the front of his outfit. However, I ended up struggling a lot with this process. I think I ended up doing a total of 4 different types of variants for the lace-up, with the 4th one finally being the only one that ended up working for me. So what I did was I took this brown ribbon, cut a long strip out of it, folded it in half, and then sewed a straight stitch across to make a thinner piece of ribbon. The next thing that I did was I flipped my shirt inside out, and then I took my ribbon and then pinned it in place to create a lace-up design. And here is how the lace-up should end up looking like after it has been all sewn down. So for the next step, I needed to create the individual leaves that will end up draping on the shoulders and also on the back of the costume itself. So what I did was I folded a piece of paper in half and then I roughly sketched out a leaf pattern that I liked. After I was happy with how it looked, I cut it out and ended up with a shape like this. Next, I took the leaf pattern that I just cut out and used it to draw a whole bunch of other leaf patterns onto my green fabric. I ended up cutting out a whole bunch of leaf patterns just to the point where I was satisfied with how many leaves were actually on the costume itself. And here is a clip of me showing you guys how I sewed down each and every one of those leaf patterns. And after sewing them down, I cut them out, flipped them inside out, and ended up with a whole bunch of leaf patterns like this. Next, I pinned where I roughly wanted the leaves to sit on my costume and sewed them down. After sewing the leaves onto my costume, I also decided to use this clear nylon thread, and basically what I did was I used this thread to seamlessly stitch down all of the leaf patterns on top of each other to prevent them from flying all over the place when I'm actually wearing the costume. So now that I finished the top, it was now time for me to actually get started on the waistband or belt and the arm gauntlets or arm bracers. So as you guys saw in the previous clip, the first thing that I did was I took a proper measurement of my mid-stomach area. After taking my measurements, I cut out my belt, cutting it a tad bit smaller than the original size so that I can actually make the little lace-up design that I wanted for the very front of the belt. So as you guys see in this clip, the belt looks a lot smaller or thinner. I don't really know the proper word, but the reason why it looks smaller or thinner is because I actually ended up trimming it down a lot. I didn't want the belt to look bulky on me. I wanted it to look like a normal belt with a good lace-up on the front, so that is why it looks a lot thinner than the previous clip that I just showed to you guys. But anyways, what I'm doing here is I took my chalk and also my tape measure and I equally marked out where I wanted the holes to be. After I marked out where I wanted the holes to be, I simply took my hole puncher and then poked holes through the leather. So for the arm gauntlets, it was pretty much the same thing as the belt. What I did was I took my tape measure and I measured out how tall I wanted the gauntlets to be. After I got my measurement, I traced that out onto my leather fabric and cut it out. Finally, after cutting 2 of those out and trimming them both down to size, I took my tape measure and I marked out where I wanted the holes to be. And after marking out where I wanted the holes to be, I took my hole puncher and poked holes through the leather. So at this point in the video, the costume is done. However, I still needed to give my Tinkerbell doll a makeover because I will be using her for not only my photo shoot, but the clips that I'll be showing at the very end of this video. So for the first thing that I did, I printed out these 2 wing templates that I got off of Google, and then I traced those on a blank sheet of paper. After tracing both of the patterns out on my piece of paper, I cut them out and ended up with 2 wing patterns that looked like this. So because I made the wings out of paper, they weren't standing as straight as I wanted them to be, and they ended up falling down in weird, awkward positions. So how I ended up fixing this was I actually took clear tape and I basically just coated both the front and the back of the wings to help stabilize them a lot more than they were before. And here is how Tink looked after her hair and wings were done. The last thing that I needed to do was to give her the blue bow that goes around her bun. I did this by cutting a small piece out of this blue ribbon, fabric tacking both of the ends to prevent them from fraying, and after that dried, I tied it around her bun. After that, both my costume and Tink were fully done, and here are some clips of how my costume turned out.